Hey guys, welcome to part 4 of my Learning Python YouTube series. In this video we're going to be going over if statements and essentially how we can use those to make a little program at the end. It's just going to be a simple calculator. But essentially an if statement is sort of the part of Python that you would use to handle decision making. And there are sort of three main parts to an if statement. There's the if condition, elif conditions. You can have multiple of those. We'll get into that more when we actually get to that part. And then the else statement. So those might not mean anything to you just yet, but again, we'll get into that. So just if statements, just putting that there as a little title. So first of all, how do we write an if statement? Because you can know how it works and everything, but if you don't know how to code it, what's the point, right? So I'm just going to go over that real quick. It's essentially just the syntax that I'm going to be showing you right now. How you do it is you just put if and then a condition with a colon, and then inside of the if statement, and the syntax says that something is inside this if block if there's an indent. And how you can indent, you just hit tab, for those of you who don't know. But just like that, if your condition, just a little colon at the end to signify that you are done writing your condition, then hit enter, and inside of it with an indent, you are going to type the rest of your code. So I'm just going to put pass there for now. That'll just make sure I don't have any errors. The if statement doesn't actually do anything. It's just sort of passing through. You can think of it as that. All right, so what is this condition now? You can't just put anything you want, but in a sense you can kind of put anything you want. So let me just explain. The condition is a Boolean statement that either returns true or false by definition of a Boolean statement. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you remember when we learned about Boolean variables and things like that, and how they can either be true or false, and we also learned about the operators and how we can get different statements or different statements to either give us a true or false condition. Here, I'll give you an example. So if I did something like 3 is greater than 2, that is a Boolean statement because that is a true statement, right? If I said 3 is less than 2, well, we know that 3 is not less than 2, aka that is a false statement, but still a Boolean statement, right? So anything that you can read and will either be true or false, that is a Boolean statement, essentially. And that's essentially what you're going to have here in the sort of condition area. Don't mind where it says condition now, that's just a placeholder. We could even set this as a variable. So we could say condition is equal to 3 greater than 2. And inside here, we can say print, and we'll just say works, something like that. So we have our condition here, 3 greater than 2, right? And 3 is greater than 2. So we know that this will equal true, which means condition will be set to true. And if this condition is true, this part runs, right? So let's run it. As you can see, it prints out works, right? Again, let me just go over that one more time, a little slower possibly, if I can. 3 is greater than 2. And this statement here is true, right? So this part right here is returning true. And that value true is being assigned to condition. All right, so now we have a variable condition that equals true. This is essentially the same thing as this. But we are now checking something here. If I switch this here, then it would be false because 3 is not greater than 2, just to clarify. So condition is now true. And then with the if statement, we want the condition to be true so that the block inside here runs. If it wasn't true, it wouldn't run. So let's test that even. So 3 is less than 2. I have a false statement right here. So in theory, since condition is false, since condition is false and not true, the block inside of it should not run, right? So this print statement should not run. And since there's nothing else left in this program here, nothing should be printed out. So let's run it. And as you can see, nothing happened. So now we know how to use the if statement, like the gist of an if statement, but there's two more main parts of an if statement. There's an elif part and an else, and those are their own little blocks, and I'm going to show you those now. So elif for example, or else if, that's just how it's being denoted. So it's just like this. Elif also takes in a condition. Let's say condition 2, just for the sake of simplicity, I guess. And this condition will be different from this condition, obviously. Actually, no, that's not true. It could be the same, but the only problem is this block here, let's say print block 2, it could be the same. Like, you could technically do it, but you never would. And I'll get to that when I say, or I explain how it runs. But an elif statement is essentially, if this statement fails, this statement will be checked next, right? So we have block 2, let's just say else if, I don't know, something like that. And then the last one we're going to have is else. And else is essentially if all of the if and elif statements have failed. In this if statement. You can have multiple if statements. Obviously those won't impact this entire if statement, but if these statements here fail, the else statement will run. All right, that's why it's last. So we're gonna say everything else failed. We'll put a little sad face too. Okay, so let's make some conditions here to see how this really works. So, well, I guess I deleted the elif, but let's say we'll have a number here, and we'll say 5, and we won't call it condition, we'll say num. So we'll say if number is greater than 3, then print 3 plus, I don't know, as a string, sorry, 3 plus. Elif number is greater than 1, print 1 plus. And then the else, right, I have that already. Except we'll change this to say, I don't know, 0. And we'll only use positive or the 0 value. But if you think this through, how do you think this if statement will run? Well, I'll tell you. First thing it does is you have your number, right? And it's comparing the number to 3, because this is our Boolean statement right here, all right? So if number is greater than 3, well, it checks. Is number greater than 3? Yes, it is. 5 is greater than 3. So that means this part here runs, right? But will this run? No. And why is that the case? Because this is an else if. So it's saying else, meaning if this part has not run, but then the else comes with another condition, hence the if part. Else if, elif, I think you're getting it. But if this part fails, this part then checks. If this part fails, then all of these have failed, you know, by definition, and else runs because there's no other if statements to check, right? So it's essentially going in order. So let's see, what will this code print? We have 5, and it checks if number is greater than 3, 5 is greater than 3, so it'll print 3 plus, right? Just here. Now, since we know that this statement will no longer run and this statement will no longer run, we know that this code should just print out 3 plus, right? So let's run it and double check. Perfect, 3 plus. Now, what do you think would happen if I were to switch these around? So I'm going to have to make this the elif, and I'm going to have to make this the if. All right, so number is still 5, but the first statement it's checking now is if number is greater than 1, right? So number is greater than 1, so it prints out 1 plus, right? So it's not going to jump over here, nothing fancy like that, it's always going in order. You see what I mean? Now if you had something like, I don't know, a grade, like in school, you could just have, I don't know, it's out of 100, let's say 50. They weren't doing so hot. And then we could even just say if grade is greater than 80, because I'm in Canada, and an 80 is an A in Canada. If it's 80 and above, actually I should say greater or equal to. Then we also have a B, which is greater or equal to 70, but less than 80, of course. So we're going to have B. Elif num is greater than 60. Oh, why are these? Sorry. So if number is greater than 60 but less than 70, it should be a C. Elif number or num is greater than 50, print D, and that is considered a pass, a 50 or above in Canada. And if it's anything else, then it'll be an F or a fail. All right. So just looking through this, if I have a grade of 50, oh, these should all be changed to grade. My bad. If I have a grade of 50, which statement should run? So let's think it through. We have if grade is greater than 80, right? Well, it's not greater than 80. So it goes down to here. If grade is greater than 70, well, since this one failed, we know it's at least smaller than 80, but could it be greater than 70? Well, it's not. Next one, we know it's not 70, but is it greater than 60? Still no, so this doesn't run. Now we get to our fourth if statement, or our third elif statement. Is grade greater or equal to 50? Yes, it is. So this part here will run, print D. And if we save it and run it, as you can see, this student here got a D. Not so smart. But that's essentially it. That's essentially how an if statement works. It's pretty straightforward. You can mess around with it, make your own sort of Boolean statements, and pass them in, see what you get. And they're just fun. And they're an integral part in all of your Python programming that you're going to be doing in the future, just because, again, this is decision making. You want something to happen under a certain scenario, you're going to need an if statement. So, just foreshadowing. But now let's get into our project. And it's not going to be a crazy project. It's literally just going to be a very, very basic calculator. It's not going to have a graphical interface or anything, all text-based. And it's going to be super simple. All right, so I'm actually going to teach you a couple new functions. I think one or two. Yeah, probably two. To create this calculator. So let's change this title actually. Calculator. That's not how you spell it. Calculator. Perfect. So what are we going to do first for our calculator? Well, we're just going to take in two numbers and we're going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide them. Pretty straightforward. So let's do it. So first we want our operator. So operator, we're going to create a variable and we are going to set it to user input. All right, so we're going to use the input function. And essentially that just takes in user input, you'll see when we run it. And we can actually pass in a little string into the input with a message that will be displayed before the input. So this will be used to sort of inform the user of this program what they should be doing. So we're just going to say add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And then we'll put a little colon and a bit of a space because it's going to accept their input right here where the cursor is flashing. All right, so we have our operator and it's going to be set to the input. You'll see how this works. Actually, I'll even show you right now. So let's run it. It puts our little message and it's waiting for user input here. So if I say test, for example, now it's set the variable operator to the string test. And we can see that because if I do print operator and run it again, just type in test, as you can see, it just prints out test, right? So essentially what the input does is it takes in user input as a string and it stores it into operator. And it's important that we know that it takes it in as a string because that'll be important when I show you the second function or second new function that we're going to be using. So it's not too complicated. This is essentially how you're going to be using it most of the time, just putting a little message and taking in the input. But now we're going to create two more variables. So the next one is going to be num1 for obvious reasons, and we're going to take the input or another input where we're just going to say enter the first number, right? Pretty straightforward. and num2 is going to be input, enter the second number. Now, remember I said that input takes these in as a string, right? So if we had string values for number 1 and number 2, we can't just use we can't just type num1 plus num2 to add and subtract, multiply, divide, because what will happen actually is they'll be added, subtracted, multiplied, divided as strings, and half of those operations can't even happen. So, or on a string at least. You can add them. I'm not too sure about subtraction, multiplication I think, and division definitely not. But that's not important. What I'm going to show you is the next function, next new function, and it is the int function. And we're going to put it around our user input. All right, so I'm just highlighting that so you can see it a bit better. So we have int, and we have two brackets around our input function. And essentially what it's doing is input is going to return the user input, which we saw when we used it up here. And now that string input is going to be passed into the integer function. And what the integer function does is it casts the string to a integer. So it's essentially taking in an input, and if that input can be converted to an integer, which in this case it can, then it will do so. If it can't, it'll cause an error. All right? So if we type in a number as the input, then it will work. If we type in something that cannot be converted to an integer, then it will not work. But for the sake of demonstration purposes, we're going to be typing in a number. So we're just going to do that to the next one as well. So again, we're putting it around the input function and just passing that whole return value from, or the returned input from this input function here will be passed into the integer function and then set to variables number 1 and number 2 accordingly, right? So now we have our number 1 and number 2 input values as integers, which means we can now use regular addition, or not regular addition, but integer addition, subtraction, multiplication, etc. AKA, we can do this now. And it'll give us the values that we want. But again, we are not quite done. All we have done is set variables. This doesn't actually do anything yet. So what we want to do next is we want to use our if statement. So we're going to say if operator is equal to add. Now if you remember from the previous video where we went over operations and the double equal sign, if you remember, it's comparing to the two values on the left and the right, right? So if the string operator is equal to the string add, aka if I input add here, then operator is going to be equal to add. If add is equal to add, that would be a true statement, and then the code inside would run. All right, so if the operator is add, we want to print out num1 plus num2, right? Next we have our elif. So elif operator is equal to subtract. We want to print out num1 minus num2. We're not going to worry about negative numbers. Oh, why is this white here? Did I do something wrong? We'll see when we run it. It's fine. Elif operator is equal to multiply. We're going to print out num1 times num2. I could have just used my keyboard instead of clicking, but whatever. Elif operator is equal to divide. We are going to print out num1 divided by num2. All right, and if you remember, that's going to give us a float value because division always returns a float, even if the value is an integer value. And else, meaning if the input up here, if the operator value is not add, not subtract, not multiply, and not divide, we're just going to print out I cannot perform that operation. All right, that's just going to say, hey, I can't do that. I can't do what you're asking. So let's see if this works, because I'm actually kind of concerned. Maybe this theme doesn't highlight things properly, but whatever. Let's run it. Okay, So first we're going to give it our user input. So let's try adding. Enter the first number, I don't know, 5. Enter the second number, 3. So 5 plus 3, we should get 8. Boom, gave us 8. Let's try it again. Just going to move this over here so we can keep looking at the code. Let's subtract this time. Subtract, right, and let's do 5 and 3 again. 5 minus 3, we should get 2. Boom, we got 2. Let's do the rest of them. So multiply, enter the first number. We can do, I don't know, 2 and 3. Should give us 6, and it did. Lastly, we have divide. Let me just move this, it's going off my monitor. There we go. Oops. Divide. And let's divide 10 by 2, 5.0. Remember, it's a float, even though the value is actually 5. And then, oops, don't want to type anything there. Let's just run it one last time. Gotta make this box a little smaller. There we go. And we're just going to say, I don't know, potato. Enter the first number, 12 and 3. I cannot perform that operation. So just like that, we have a function in calculator that can add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And if we put in some garbage, then it'll give us an error. And you can set up, or not an error, but it'll just tell us that it won't work. And you can set things up like that for your numbers. You can set it up so that it'll tell you that you can't perform the operation right after you input something incorrectly. Obviously, I had to put in potato and then 12 and 3. Or just numbers, but yeah, if statements are pretty good and very important, so make sure you get this down. So that's the end of this video. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below. A lot of you guys are in the Discord server that I created for my discord.py series, so you may have noticed there is a Help Python channel now, and you guys can ask questions about Python there. And that's fine. I'm going to sort of mess with the server a little bit, make it a bit more modular in terms of just updating things, in terms of when I create a new series, I can just throw in the channels and things like that there. And yeah, so essentially what I'm trying to get at is that the channel will soon be officially ready to accept support, or to provide support for general Python questions. And even then, this is pretty basic stuff, so even if you show up there and have a couple questions, you'll probably get some help anyways, but just make sure you do so in the Help Python channel so as not to spam the not relevant channels. But anyways, that's the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Questions, go to the Discord from the previous series if you want, or just leave them in the comments below. I'll try to get to as many as I can. If you liked it, leave a like. Comment, subscribe. I already said to comment twice, 3 times now. And that's the end of the video, which I've also said like 3 times now. So yeah, bye.